Hey, welcome to the Milwaukee Music Lessons Podcast. My name is Alex Bennett. I am the studio owner and director here. I've had the privilege of teaching for the last 15 years, and I've personally taught over 300 students. Might be more than that if I'm being honest. I'm probably underselling it, but I put together this podcast as a way to kind of just express my thoughts about music learning, about teaching, and to try and share some of the insights that I've had as a professional music teacher. I also, just to kind of clarify what instruments I play and what instruments I teach, I play a lot of the rock band instruments. The two that I'm most proficient in and the two that I teach are guitar and drums, but I also play piano and voice as well, and some bass and a few other miscellaneous things along the way here too. So in today's episode, we're going to be kind of going down a structure in more detail that I talked about back in episode 13. So if you haven't seen that episode, you should definitely go back and check that one out, because it kind of sets up some of the stuff that I'm talking about here and also in episode 14. But just to give you a quick short recap, in episode 13, I spent a bunch of time talking about the kind of the five pieces of the puzzle that I consider important when it comes to music learning. And those five pieces were technical ability, the experience, music theory, ear training, and also creativity. And so I kind of briefly outlined in episode 13 what I meant by all of those. And then in episode 14, I started kind of working my way down the line there. I started talking about technical ability in a lot of details, more specifically, like what do I mean by it and how do you kind of start to work your way up the ladder, some of the common things that I saw as a teacher and places where people got stuck, maybe some misconceptions that people had, how to kind of get through different barriers. And that's kind of what I'm going to rinse and repeat a little bit of today, except we're going to start talking about another one of the categories. So for today, we're going to talk about experience, essentially, is what we're talking about. I described it as song, like the number of songs that you know, chord knowledge, rhythm knowledge, but what it ultimately boils down to is experience, I would say, is probably the best way to put it. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, and I'm going to talk about some of the stuff that I have seen as a teacher over the years. So really quickly, when I talk about experience, what I'm thinking of is like how many songs have you really sat down and tried to learn from, whether that's like bits and pieces of them or an entire song from beginning to end. That can be the number of chords that you've taken the time to learn. So for example, as a guitar player, you might have spent a lot of time and learned a few different chord variations. You might have learned a few open chords. You might have learned what bar chords are, or you might have learned what power chords are. And all of these things are ideas that are going to get reused in different places. And so it's not just did you experience them, but also do you remember them? Now, there is a distinction. I'm drawing a line and distinction between theory and the experience that you have before, because the experience is just you being involved in it, being engaged in it, versus the theory is understanding kind of the crafting and the language of it. So it's a much more detailed version. I'm a proud father of two, and right now our oldest one is only 2.5 years old, and he can speak the language in different, to a certain degree, to a certain capacity. He doesn't always enunciate things well, and he doesn't always speak in complete sentences, but you can start to get the gist of what it is that he's saying. And the reason that he can do that is through experience and exposure. So he hears what mom and dad say and like some of the stuff that's going on around him, and then he tries to parrot it. And he doesn't always have a super great defined understanding of it, but just through sheer exposure, he's starting to pick up certain things, certain words, certain phrases, and see how they're connected together. And many of us as musicians start very much the same way. We might learn a couple of basic terms just because we need to be able to communicate with our teachers or with whatever our learning environment is. But a lot of it at the beginning is just we do. We try and learn a song to the best of our ability. And many of us have many different ways of doing that. But that sheer experience builds up a foundation that makes it so that way later when we start to supplement it with the remaining three categories, the music theory, the ear training, and the creativity side of things, we have a great foundation, a great baseline for it, because we've seen it and tried to experience it in the real world. And then eventually you'll figure out that you can fill in those gaps and you can use the other three things to help improve your learning experience. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we keep going. But that's what I wanted to just kind of lay the groundwork for it. Maybe a little bit more defined understanding of what I mean by experience and just why it's important. Okay, so let's talk about like big picture, different levels of music experience. So in the early stages, if you're brand new, there's a lot to go through. There's a lot of just like kind of meandering and wandering around in the dark, right? You have your first attempts on any given song, right? So everything's brand new, everything's like genuine and original to you. Novel is the word I was looking for. And then, you're going to try and probably just deal with portions of songs. It's very unlikely that you're going to do entire songs unless they're very simple stuff. A lot of like nursery rhymes, for example. You can learn how to play Mary Had a Little Lamb very easily. But if your dream is to learn how to play like advanced classical pieces or jazz or even pop stuff, rock stuff, the chances are that you're probably just going to be learning portions of things, or at the very least, you're going to be learning simplified versions of things. And so at level one, it's just about doing. The phrase that I love is that quantity is a quality unto itself. And so you just have to like get in and try stuff and throw things against the wall and see what sticks. The quality thing is something that will improve over time, but it's just exposure right now is really what you need. That's what you need. Now, when we get past that initial bump and we've gotten through the exposure phase, then level 2 starts to become familiarity. So this is where let's say you learn a technique in one song. Maybe that could be a chord type or a rhythm or, the way that you like the structure of a song. And then you start to see that happen in other places. So quick example, let's say you learn what a 12-bar blues is, and then suddenly you learn 2 or 3 songs that have a 12-bar blues, and you start to realize like, oh, okay, these things all have this pattern in common. You learn a couple of open chords on a guitar, or, you learn a certain shape on the piano, and then all of a sudden you play 2 or 3 more songs and you realize, oh, okay, these guys are just using the same patterns, the same techniques. And there's all sorts of stuff that could apply to. That could be legato, that could be variations in like your dynamics, your intensity, different types of tempo, like just any place that you start to see patterns where it's like, this is not the first time I've seen this before. This is continuous exposure to familiar ideas. And so this helps a lot because now you're starting to you're starting to be more proactive instead of reactive. You're being able to anticipate the things that are starting to come in front of you. And this is important because, for one, it reduces the amount of like cognitive load that you have. Your brain is not torn in like 20 different places. You're able to like keep the familiar things as kind of background tasks and focus on more complicated things that you're doing with your hands or your limbs or your fingers. It also builds a lot of confidence, right? The ability to say, I've seen this before and I've conquered it before, or I've done it to a certain level, which means that I can definitely do it again. And it also helps improve some of your instincts. You're able to build a sense of not just muscle memory, but also like cognitive memory, brain memory here. I say that like it's a new thing, like brain memory. Yeah, brain memory. Sounds silly once I say it that way. So you're starting to develop instincts is what you're getting. Then after that, you're starting to kind of get to that third tier, which is like actual functional use. You're applying the same chords, the same rhythms, or the same patterns, but you're starting to see them in new situations. Subtle variations, subtle changes, the ability to play without stopping, the ability to play through mistakes, and most importantly, the ability to take your songs and have new experiences that don't, that not every experience is a new experience. It's a variation of an older experience. You're able to transfer pre-existing skills and actually use them in new ways. And I touched on this in technical ability, right? Like why would you learn scales and patterns and things like that? But this also applies here, right? Now we're talking about a little bit less of like the exercise type of thing, the like going to the gym and just doing squats versus getting out onto the football field or the baseball diamond or the basketball court and actually seeing how that stuff is used in a real world context. So that's kind of the three levels of experience and what you're looking for and what you're trying to navigate your way through, right? And obviously in the early stages, everything is level one. And then later on, you're going to see a lot more level twos, a lot more of the familiarity, and then eventually a lot more of the level three, which is the functional use of your experience. Okay, so let's talk about the difference between good and bad experience, because I think not all experience is created equal. I do think that there is some truth. I mentioned in the beginning that quantity is a quality unto itself. And so the person who manages to get 60 minutes worth of practice is going to do a lot better than the person who gets 10 minutes worth of practice. But that doesn't mean that all practice is created equal, right? That person who gets 10 minutes worth of practice, they might be able to structure their practice or structure their focus in a way that is worth like 30 minutes worth of practice. And so, if that person was to just increase the amount of practice that they did to 30 minutes, they would still get better than the person who is at 60 minutes, right? So there is a balance and there is a trade-off. And I do think that in the early stages, you just need to make sure that you're practicing consistently. That's the most important step, right? It's over time, and making sure that you're like it'd be better to do 10 minutes per day than to do one day of 60 minutes, just because that's kind of how our brains work. We're designed for continuous exposure opposed to like a prolonged one-time experience. So you need that continuous exposure for sure. But long-term, there is such a thing as like good experience versus bad experience. So let's talk a little bit about what good experience looks like, and then I can talk about what bad experience looks like. So good experience is getting through an entire song, even if it means you're doing it imperfectly. So maybe the song that you're working on is 16 measures. Just the ability to actually get all the way to it from beginning to end, as opposed to like, I did 2 lines and then I got bored or I got frustrated and then I stopped and then I just decided to move on to the next thing. That's a problem. Never finishing, never getting to the end. That's bad experience. Giving up too early on certain things, not having a certain level of quality standard is a problem. The next thing too is good experience is repeating uncomfortable material. To get to the kind of the dream place that we all want to get to, the dream level of musician, you're going to have to do uncomfortable things. That's just part of it's just part of the journey, right? If you could do it all naturally, you wouldn't need to ever practice. But the point of practice is to take things that are uncomfortable and do them enough times until they are comfortable. And so for one of the analogies that I make is that there was a point in time where basic stuff like walking was uncomfortable to you. Now, for probably everybody viewing this video, you don't remember that because it's so far earlier in your life. Most of us are learning to walk around the 1-year mark, but that first 12 months of your life, walking and crawling even were uncomfortable. And now you don't think about it. You just get up and go and do it. And that's because when you're a baby, like you don't have that give up function inside of you yet. You try to imitate the world around you. And so I think there are too many times where we give up too early, or we hang back. We're not willing to kind of stick through it to the end. And really it just comes down to, like, can you live up to that standard that you have in your head? The ability to persist despite not getting the immediate results that you want. The point of the journey is not about immediacy. It's about long-term gratification. And the thing about long-term gratification is that it happens in the long term. It doesn't always happen right now. So it might take you a month of playing the same thing, 3 months of playing the same thing, 6 months of playing the same thing. And it doesn't mean that that's the only thing that you practice, but it also means that you don't give up and you come back to it. And then when you do finally hit that milestone, boy, the dopamine rush is ginormous, right? The longer it takes for the payoff to happen, the bigger the enjoyment, the bigger the fulfillment that comes out of it at the end. So anyways, I'm probably not saying anything that's revolutionary here, but it's still good to be said because there's a lot of people who give up too early. Okay, all right, sounds good. So more good experience, right? Practicing things that feel musical, the ability to have kind of that musical flow built into you, even if it's not actually there. You want to practice like the person that you want to become. And anything that you do that's not that should not be a part of your practice repertoire. The ability to make small mistakes but still continue, that's good experience. Perfection is a lifelong achievement that never really quite happens. And so you do have to find that, like, when you're playing and you make a mistake, can you recover? The ability to recover is its own skill. And many people, they make one mistake and then they give up. It's okay to, like, start over when you make a mistake, but I think many people, going to the bad experience side of things, I think many people, they make one mistake and then it's like it takes them a whole minute just to get back on that train. Remember that experience is the most important factor. How much you do something is the most important factor. And if I practiced for 30 minutes and every time I made a mistake, it took me a minute to get back on the train and just start over again, because I'm, like, dejected or not feeling good, that's a lot of time lost. I'm at the point now where it's like I can make a mistake and just jump back on the train, whether that's starting over or just moving on to the next note. I mean, it happens instantly. And so I can get essentially 10 times plus the experience in the same amount of time that somebody who would pause and stop like that. And it seems like I'm making a ridiculous example, but there are a lot of people who are like that, where it's like even small breaks, like 10 seconds, 15 seconds, those breaks, they add up over a long period of time. So just the ability to just recover from those mistakes and kind of lay them out, that's good experience. Okay, to talk a little bit more about bad experience too, right? Things like never finishing songs are a problem. Never getting to the end. Only playing things that are easy is another one that I see. And I understand why people do that too. If you only play what's easy, or if you spend a lot of time, let me go back a second. If you spend a lot of time focusing on honing your skill at a certain level, you've gone through a certain amount of pain and suffering. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to revel in that, wanting to just soak and absorb that. That's fine. But it also becomes a problem when you never leave that comfort zone. If you never leave that comfort zone, then you stop growing. And usually for most people, when they stop growing is when the instrument stops becoming fun. So they're trading short-term pain for what's really long-term pain. And that's where I see a lot of people fizzle out, is they reach a certain level and then they want to just sit and enjoy it. And again, that's fine in short bursts, but long-term, you're going to get bored. The instrument's going to stop feeling like an achievement, because the reality is that you've stopped achieving things with it. So if you avoid all the easy stuff, if you avoid all the hard stuff, if you avoid all the hard stuff, then that's bad experience, and you're gonna fizzle out. That's just the way it is. So, okay, all right. Let's go over a couple of like instrument specific examples. So, good experience when it comes to guitar, learning new chords, learning new strum patterns, learning new scales, new song formats, basically like getting out of your comfort zone and learning some of the big, like broad stroke stuff that's going to be applicable in later formats. That would be guitar. Piano, same type of thing, playing through full songs with both your hands together, right? Being able to, get all of your limbs coordinated and trying new styles. For vocals, like working through singing difficult songs, stuff where maybe your pitch isn't as accurate as you want it to be, right? It's really easy to avoid songs that are difficult, that have higher ranges of motion, that have big changes in dynamics. You want to be able to get through stuff that is challenging and difficult and challenges your vocal folds, but also challenges your ear to get through. And then with drums, for example, playing through an entire track without timing issues, playing with an actual song or a metronome, as opposed to just working on small loops where we stop every time we make a mistake and then we get back on. I think all of these instruments too can benefit from playing along with something that doesn't stop. Personal anecdote, when I first started playing, I learned the very original first-time song, Iron Man, right? Very original of you, Alex. And the thing about when I first played that song is that it took me like probably 2 months to actually get through the parts of the song that I wanted to get through. But the thing is that even though it took me 2 months, by the end of it, I was actually able to play with the original song. I didn't play the solos yet. That was beyond my skill capability, but I could play all of the rhythm parts from beginning to end in Iron Man. And in the early stages, it's really frustrating because when you make the mistake, the song does not stop for you. But when that would happen, I would put my clicker on Windows Media Player. That's how old this was. I'd put my clicker on Windows Media Player to exactly where I wanted to go, and then I would just click the button again, and it would take me back, and then I would try and pick it up. And I probably played through all of those parts 100 plus times, but that was the standard that I had set. And honestly, it was the best thing that I could have done, even though I didn't know it at the time. It's the best thing I could have done was to just stick with that and say, no, we're playing with the song no matter what, because if I can't play with the song, then I can't actually play the song. And frankly, it worked out really well for me. I can't complain. Okay, sounds good. So first of all, as we start to wrap this up, I want you to start to think about how you should feel about experience, okay? So first of all, for students, don't feel like you have to rush through the different levels of your playing. There are certain levels where if you reach too high, too fast, you're just going to stifle yourself. So even though I talked earlier about not having a high enough goal, there is such a thing as the opposite direction. I think most people get stuck with too easy. But I think also that, reaching too high too fast can be a problem. Now, guys, this is such a delicate topic to talk about because we talk all the time here about having a BHAG, which is a big, hairy, audacious goal. I didn't come up with that term. That's from somebody else here. But the idea is, shoot for the stars and at least you'll land on the moon type of thing, where if you're focused on having a gigantic, big, long-term goal, something that seems beyond your reach, go for that. But there's still tiers to that, right? Like you still have to work your way up the pyramid in blocks. And so while you might be looking at the top of the pyramid at that big, huge, gigantic goal, you still need to break it down in steps to figure out what the steps are to get there. The point of the BHAG is just to give you that pinpoint precision for planning, so that way you can say like, okay, well, if my ultimate goal is, like in my case, it was like, I want to learn how to play Eruption by Van Halen. It's like, okay, well, we need to go through some steps to be able to do that. So first we just need to learn a few different rock songs, things like that. Then let's find a couple songs that have some really simple leads to it, so we'll learn how to play like the solo from Smells Like Teen Spirit or something like that, something kind of rocky. We can learn a couple other cool kind of little leads, like maybe like a Sissy Strut or something like that. And then, after a while, it's like, okay, now we actually have to learn how to play a Van Halen song. So what's a really easy Van Halen song that we can do? Okay, You Really Got Me Now is a good one, right? Or we can start to learn some more complicated ones like Ain't Talking About Love. And then from there, we can start to learn his style and how to copy him and how to mimic him. And then eventually we can start to learn some of the specific techniques. Like, okay, I learned how to do tapping on the guitar, and then now I have to learn like different bends and things like that. And now we're going to learn how to actually utilize those together in Eruption. And the thing is that, like, even though I had this big, hairy, audacious goal after a year, like I set a timeline too. I said I wanted to hit that after a year. Now, did I really hit it? Not really. I could kind of play it. I mean, if I played it for you, you go like, okay, all right, I hear it. Was it perfect? No, definitely not. But that big, hairy, audacious goal propelled me forward. It gave me something big to look at off in the distance, so that way I kept a straight and narrow path. Okay, but the point is that I didn't try to play Eruption on day one. I spent time building up to that, and I had a sequence in my head. Even though it was kind of a rough sequence and I didn't know what I was doing, I still had a rough sequence in my head of like, okay, what are some like tiers of difficulty of stuff that I can slowly start to do that will eventually get me into that big ultimate goal. Okay, so I didn't stick it too easy by just sticking with my comfort zones, right? Instead, I looked far ahead, and then I broke down stages of the pyramid, so that way I slowly but surely walked my way up to trying to be able to do Eruption, right? That was the, so anyway, so when I say don't rush levels, that's a much more detailed understanding of what, okay? Also, along the way, there's going to be awkward phases. You're going to have like growth spurts. And the thing about like seeing growth is that many things have to happen under the surface before you start to have like these big showings in your skill jump. So if you've ever read Atomic Habits by James Clear, he makes an excellent analogy in there, which is that if your goal is to melt an ice cube and your room temperature is 27 degrees and you change it to 28 degrees, even though you've gotten one step closer to melting the ice cube, the temperature of the room has changed 1 degree. So you've actually gotten closer to your goal, even though what you're visually seeing with the ice cube is not actually changing. And many times when you hear people talk about like progress is not a linear thing, I agree with that from an outer perspective. From an inner perspective, I think that often progress can be much more linear, but sometimes what you see on the outside is not a reflection of the internal growth that's happening. And sometimes the internal growth, there has to be a certain amount before suddenly you kind of jump tier levels and you start to see your improvement playing. So understand that there are awkward phases, and some tiers require more time and effort or more focused concentration and effort. So there's going to be those awkward pauses, right? Those awkward stages in your playing. And then finally, like, you do want to chase completion over extreme polish. That's not to say, again, that you shouldn't have certain standards, but there will be times where you learn a song and you get it to like 90%, and you could spend all your time over the next 2 months getting it to 100% completion. But in reality, there are certain like levels of improvement that are just going to happen regardless of what you spend your time working on. And so if you work on like one power chord passage, so let's say you do something like a Rock You Like a Hurricane on guitar, and then you get it pretty good. You get it like 80 to 90% down. Chances are that going and working on other songs that also use power chords will naturally improve your ability to play Rock You Like a Hurricane. And so overall, the experience would be improved if you went and learned 2, 3, 4, 5 new songs that use power chords. And then just virtue by doing more power chord songs, when you come back to that song later in 3 or 6 months, you will have actually improved without even having to play the song. That's kind of how it works, especially during the early to intermediate phases. That's a lot of how it works. So anyways, this is how you should think about experience in my opinion. Now, I'm going to end a little bit with a teaser into talking about how how, experience, while it's the foundation, there's still some other things that need to happen later on, which is what the following episodes are going to start to be about, right? Because I still have 3 more categories to go over. I still have the music theory, I still have the ear training, and I still have the creativity side of things. All of this right now, the first 2, the technical ability and the experience side of things, they are the baseline for everything else. And oftentimes I spend most of my early days talking about these first 2 things, which is fine. Like, not everything has to grow at a perfectly even pace. Much of learning happens in asymmetrical ways where you kind of go extreme into one spot, and then after a while, the difference between the first 2 gets so great that the other areas start to become an anchor that weighs heavier and heavier and heavier on your progress. And so then you need to go and spend some more focused time working on the other things. And that's fine. Eventually, you will start to need the theory to be able to understand, like, okay, so what even is a power chord? Why does it work? And how is it implemented into other things? And how can I learn how to, how it all sticks together in my brain? So that way, when I'm learning new songs, not only am I just recognizing the shapes and the patterns, but I'm able to actually assign terminology to this so that way I can memorize things faster, I can learn new stuff faster, and I can communicate with other people faster. Even if you're not communicating with other people directly, if you don't know what certain terms are and you're trying to learn stuff on the internet, it's like if you don't understand how to phrase it properly, you're going to get some really crazy results. So even if you're a self-learner, it's still benefiting to you to actually learn some of those terms. Ear training is basically your thermometer, the ability to hear stuff accurately and understand where you're making mistakes and where the differences between your playing and everything else that's going on are. The ability to hear stuff and understand what it is before it even happens. That's where ear training and theory really start to come together. And then finally, this last phase, which will be creativity, which is like the final testing grounds. The ability to be creative is the proof that you actually understand all of the concepts that you're learning. And so if you can create or modify or do things and anticipate what they're going to sound like before they happen, that creativity is just the final proof test to show how well you really understand things. So, but experience and technical ability, those are by far and away, in my opinion, the most important things. And that's what I focus most on as a teacher when I deal with beginners. But as we start to get out of that beginner phase and we start to lean a little bit more towards like intermediate, or we spent, a reasonable amount of time on our instrument, then eventually these other 3 things start to get important. And that's what I'm going to go into detail on next time. So for now, thank you so much for tuning in. I think this is probably a longer episode. What am I at, 35 minutes here right now? Okay, maybe I've been rambling on just a little bit too long. But I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. There'll be few more, obviously, to follow up on these topics in a little bit more detail. Anyways, I appreciate you guys tuning in and watching, and stay tuned for the next episode. I'm trying to keep these things semi-consistent, so hopefully once every week or 2, I can get one of these out and keep talking about stuff. If you got ideas, things that you want me to talk about, things that you want me to go over, stuff you thought I glossed over or you didn't understand, message me, comment. I want to see what you guys have to say. I want to see what the community has to say. I appreciate you guys tuning in, and I will see you guys in the next episode of the MML podcast. Take care.